Hi. In the second tutorial, we did an overview of basic features, and in the third, we did a tutorial of creating sketches. In this tutorial, we want to combine those two skills by creating a simple part. In this case, a bottle. So for this example, we're going to create a new part, come up here to Sketch, click on Sketch, and start a new sketch. And this new sketch is going to be on the right plane. So now I'm in my sketch. I'm going to come up here and we're going to go to centerline. Now usually you would come up here and start with a line, but we're going to have a center line here for this example, beginning on the origin. So click on the origin. Now drag up and have your end point in line with the origin, which is going to make that constraint come up automatically. I'm going to click here, right click, and I'm going to come up here to Smart Dimension. I'm going to click on Smart Dimension, and I'm just going to dimension this to be 200 millimeters. Okay, great. So what we've done here is, obviously we created a line on the origin. This is a center line. It's a dotted line that can be used to revolve the shape of our bottle around that we're going to design. And so now that I've created my dotted line, the next step would be to create the profile of the bottle. Now, because of the fact that we're choosing to use the Revolve feature, which is right here underneath the Features tab, we only need to create our profile on one side. The reason is because we're going to be rotating it around the center line. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to select the tool I want to use to create that arc. Now there are a few different options. You can either create it using arcs, since the bottle is going to have a little bit of an organic shape. It will likely be created using lines, arcs, and possibly even splines. Now the problem with splines is that if you create a manufacturing drawing, now I'm looking a little bit ahead, if you go to create a manufacturing drawing, creating a spline might be a little bit complicated because it may be hard or confusing to dimension the complicated arc itself. And so to kind of get around that, we're going to choose to create this bottle with 3-point arcs. And this is good practice because at least in my experience, 3-point arcs are often used more than splines. So I'm going to click right on the default 3-point arc. I don't have to go down to the drop down. I can just click right on the shape. So I'm going to click on that. And now I can come over here and I'm going to start from the bottom here. I'm going to start my arc from a point that's in line or horizontal with the origin. So I'm going to click down and now it drags out my arc. I'm going to click again, that way I can create the shape and hit OK. And so now I have my arc here, and as you can see, it's not automatically constrained to the origin. See, I can move it around and stuff. So at this point, what I would like to do first is create some constraints that are going to allow me to better control this arc. So first thing I'm going to do is I want this point and the origin to be in line, because I want them to be, really in line with each other so that the bottle sits flat. So I'm going to click on the origin and I'm going to click on this point and I'm going to make them horizontal to each other. That's the first thing. Now I need to connect the origin and this point. So let me come up here and create a line between here and this point. Now they're connected, but you may notice that they're not tangent to each other. So I don't want this sort of sharp edge here. This is not uniform. This isn't going to look good. This isn't going to even work well. This may not even be blow molded properly because of a sharp edge. There may be problems in manufacturing. Who knows? So what I want to do is I want to create something here to make these tangent to each other. And if I click on both of them, there is a tangent relation that I can have. So I'm going to click on tangent and OK. So now you can see my flat horizontal line is perfectly tangent with the arc, and you can see it actually looks really great. It's perfectly uniform, and see, I now have a lot more control over what's going on here. And when you design in SolidWorks, your goal as the designer or engineer is to be able to manipulate the SolidWorks sketches at, at your whim. So if your higher up comes up and says, hey, I want you to make this arc larger, I want you to make the arc smaller, I want you to move this in, move this out, the sketch should be constrained in a way where it's very easy to manipulate it, and it's very hard to start breaking constraints and for things to fall out of place and for things not to work and for the feature to fail. So that being said, let's continue with the design. So I'm not exactly sure what I have in mind for this, but I'm going to imagine that it's going to start with a line like this, become tangent as we've made it. And then maybe from here, we'd like to add a line. So we're going to come and click on this again, and I'm just going to place this here because I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on both of them, and I'm going to set them to be tangent to each other. And as you can imagine, as you can see, we have the same control that we had when we made the other aspect of it. So I'm actually going to place this here, and you can see I actually have the option to make this vertical and to make the point of the arc center and the point at the end of this line in line with each other, vertical. So I'm actually going to set that constraint. I actually like that constraint. And that's a great thing about SolidWorks. It shows you some suggested constraints. So I'm going to place this here. And now I'm going to come up here and create another arc. And I'm just going to do the same thing. If you look closely, you can see that I believe it's set. Oh no, it didn't do that. I still need to come in and make these tangent to each other. So I'm just going to drag this down. And this is kind of moving around, and I don't really like the fact that this keeps changing. I may already know how wide I want the base to be. So let me create a line, and I'm going to make this a construction line, and we'll talk about what that is either now or in another video. But for now, I'm just going to show you how I'm going to dimension from the end of the arc to the center line. I'm going to click on these two, and I'm going to make a tangent. So now this line has snapped to the tangent of the curve. Now I'm going to create a dimension between this line and the center line. And I'm going to set that to be, for this example, maybe 60 millimeters or 50 millimeters. I'm going to bump this up to 75. And so you could see that this is the total width from the center line all the way to the end of the arc. Now that's more beneficial than if I only dimension this line, because that doesn't take into effect the arc. So now I have a little bit more control, but still not enough. I want to have a little bit more control so that I can kind of decide where this arc is going to lie, and it's not going to start moving this one around so much. So I'm going to create a dimension this time between this line and this line, and that's going to give me the ability to create an angle. So I'm going to set this to be 45, and that's going to look, I think, pretty nice. It's going to allow me to kind of manipulate this. It's getting easier and easier, but there are still things that are kind of, I want to say, annoying and not conducive to easily manipulating the whole shape here. So I'm going to add one more constraint, and that constraint is going to be to the whole center, or the arc center here. So I'm going to create a smart dimension between here and this point, and that's really going to fully constrain it. So now I only have control over this arc, and if I want to move this, I now need to do it with a dimension. I can't do it by dragging it around anymore. So for right now, I'm going to delete this so that I could still move it around before I really lock it in place. And I'm just going to drag this maybe like this, and we're going to move on. So from here, let me just lock this in place. From here, what I'd like to do is finish off the design by coming up with another line, and I'm going to make this and this tangent as I have a few times before. And so that's going to be the shape that I'm going to use. Now I want to close this off. So I'm going to come over here and come all the way down to the end. And now I have my bottle design. So from here, what I can do is I can come up to the revolve, and I can click on that revolve, and I'll be able to select the axis of rotation. And the axis of rotation is the first line that we made. It's a dotted line. So if I click on that, that's going to show the shape being rotated around that line. And so this closed shape is what's used as the revolve profile. So you could actually see, if I change the angle here, I can move this all the way down to 331, and then the shape is going to be partially open. So if you look at it from the top, I can actually change the angle here, either on the slider or in the preview window. And I can make this 90 degrees. I could change it to be 180. I can change it to be, say, 270 or even more. This is a closed bottle, so I'm going to make this 360, and I'm going to hit enter. So now that we have our design, the next step would of course be to allow us to fill it with liquid. In this case, it's really just one solid shape, so something is going to need to change to allow us to do that. And so for this example, we're going to use shell, and that's a command and a feature that we haven't spoken about yet, but it's really simple to use, and it's very effective, and it will make your life a lot easier. So I'm going to click on shell, and you can see here it says 10 millimeters here. For right now, I'm going to put 1 millimeter, and I'll show you what that is in a second. Now if I click on this face, it's going to delete this face. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to hit OK, and if I hit show preview, it's going to show me a kind of a preview of what's going to happen. So I'm just going to hit OK. And if you look closely, you can actually see that that face has been removed, and the 1 millimeters that I put in, the 1 millimeter dimension here, is actually the thickness of the wall that you're seeing inside. So if I came up and I measured between this wall and this wall, you'd be able to see that it's 1 millimeter between them. So that's a pretty neat thing right there. I'm actually going to bump this up to 3 millimeters to make it a little easier to see. But you can see that there's actually a thickness on here now. And if I come up here to the section preview, you can see much better that that's the wall thickness of the part. So that's pretty neat. We're going to come back to our sketch, and for a part that needs to be manufactured or one that needs to be designed correctly, everything needs to be fully defined. So I'm going to set a dimension on this arc. I think that's an important thing to do. I'm also going to set a dimension from here to the base in order to lock that in place, and I'm going to set an angle between the center line and this line. And as you could see, all the lines are black. It even says fully defined here. The fact that it says that means that our sketch is fully locked and it can't move around by accident. So someone can't accidentally move this line or this line when they're designing in this part. So that's great. We're going to exit the sketch, and we're going to leave it at that for this tutorial. Thank you.